Welcome to the hidden corners where truth and terror collide. Discover a realm where the lines between the living and the supernatural blur as you embark on a journey to the paranormal and visit the mysterious hidden corners of your mind.
Well, this is Book 5 of the Wolfman Chronicles. Chapter 4, Echoes of the Wild. This makes it episode 55, and we're in Alaska. The first rays of the sun were just cresting the horizon when the rental car pulled out of the gravel driveway that led up to the log house. Juanita, she had insisted on driving. Sasha wasn't up for an argument, not this early in the morning. She sat in the front passenger seat, staring out the window, watching the dark trees pass by. Usko and Catherine were talking to the two little passengers in the back seat. It made Sasha smile, hearing the sweet voices of the children. The twins, they weren't talking yet, but their laughter and the small noises they made were heartwarming, especially now with danger lurking all around them. Juanita glanced in the rearview mirror. "What were you and Julian talking about?" she asked Usko. "Oh, it was nothing. He was just reminding me to have more hay delivered for the horses when we get back to the ranch," Usko replied. At that, Juanita raised an eyebrow. "Now, I thought Miguel already asked you to take care of that." Usko knew that she just didn't believe him. "Yes, Miguel mentioned it, but Julian was just making sure I heard him, I guess," Usko replied firmly. It wasn't about to tell her the truth. Julian had wanted to make sure that Usko kept an eye out for Montoya. As of right now, Montoya was still in the hospital recovering from the gunshot wound and his subsequent heart attack. He'd undergone some major heart surgery and he'd slipped into a coma. As long as he stayed that way, everything would be just fine. But if by some luck of fate he'd survive, Julian would have to kill him. He didn't want Juanita to know about the $30,000 he'd given Montoya to stay away, or that Montoya had used that money to hire hitmen to kill Julian at the wedding. He knew that if Juanita knew the truth, she would march right into that hospital and kill Montoya herself. Julian wanted Usko to know the whole story just in case anything were to happen. But he was also sworn to secrecy. And once they reached the airport in Fairbanks and got Catherine, Usko, and the twins on the plane for their return flight to Mexico, Juanita and Sasha needed to pick up some groceries, supplies, and more ammunition. Jack had given Sasha the name of a man, referred to him by his contacts back in Montana, someone who could make a new passport and identification cards for Natia and Igor. Sasha needed to drop by his office with photographs that could be used for the new IDs. Natia had asked to come along on that drive to Fairbanks. She still felt it was necessary to get to the safe house and contact Vetya. Jack thought it'd be too dang dangerous, and she had to agree that most likely it would be a trap. She had no doubt that Vetya had already sent over reinforcements to ensure that he would get the jewel. The fact that they had not made contact at the designated time and place, that would have initiated action on his part. Now, back at the house, Jack was wiring additional security cameras around the perimeter of the meadow when he thought he saw movement in the trees. He froze, listening intently to the sounds of the forest. Whoever is out there, he thought, they know how to move without making a sound. For several more minutes he scanned the trees and the bushes of the surrounding forest. And just as he was beginning to climb down the ladder, he saw it again, a dark shape moving through the trees, still a good distance away from the house. As quietly as he could, he descended the ladder and quickly walked to the house, where Miguel was on another ladder adjusting a camera under the eaves. Without saying a word, he gestured with 2 fingers to his eyes and pointed back to the forest. Miguel quietly came down the ladder and pointed to the far corner of the meadow, near the creek, where Grizzly was burying another bear trap. They'd spent the morning hours securing the property with traps near all the footpaths that led to the forest from all different directions. Jack motioned for Miguel to get Grizzly as he went inside to alert Natia and Igor. Julian was helping them clean and load Grizzly's collections of rifles and shotguns. Most of them hadn't been used since Grizzly was a young man hunting bear, elk, and moose. We've got visitors, Jack whispered. Get ready. How many? Julian asked. Jack shook his head. I'm not sure. 2 at least. They quickly strapped on their backpacks with guns and ammo and grabbed the rest of the guns and followed Jack out of the room. Jack had already prepared a plan in case they were attacked. And Grizzly, he knew the lay of the land better than anyone else, but with his bad leg, he would stay behind at the house with Rosa. He was going to monitor the cameras and the radios, and he handed Rosa a small pistol inlaid with ivory roses in the handle. This was Jesse's, he explained. It's loaded. Can you shoot a gun? Rosa smirked as she took that pistol from Grizzly, giving it a quick, confident spin before tucking it into her belt. I could hit a gnat between the eyes at 50 paces, she replied. Well, at that, Grizzly smiled. Even with his usual gruff demeanor, he was unusually quiet, his weathered hand steady as he checked his rifle just one more time. The air was thick with anticipation, the weight of the impending attack hanging over them like a dark cloud. Well, Jack and Natia moved quickly but quietly, slipping out the side door, while Miguel and Igor disappeared out the back. Julian, he remained near the front, his sharp eyes scanning the forest for any signs of movement. The plan was a simple one. Split up in 3 directions, keeping watch on the path leading from the forest to the house. Everyone knew exactly where the bear traps had been set, and now it was just a matter of waiting for the enemy to make the first move. But the waiting didn't last long. A crack of gunfire echoed through the trees, and in an instant, chaos erupted. Natia dove for cover, rolling to her feet as she returned fire. She could see them now, 2 figures in black, their faces hidden behind dark masks. Operatives. The organization had sent them to finish the job. Natia's heart raced, but her hands remained steady as she fired off another round. The sharp sound of bullets cracking through the air was almost drowned out by the thudding of her pulse in her ears. She'd never been the target before. She didn't like the feeling of not being in control. Keep low, Jack called. Stay behind cover. Grizzly's rough voice crackled through their earpieces. I've got eyes on 2 more coming from the west. Stay sharp out there. Jack cursed under his breath. 4 of them? The organization wasn't holding back. Another shot rang out, this one narrowly missing Natia's head. She ducked lower and pressed herself flat against the log, assessing her next move. The attackers were advancing, but they weren't reckless. They were trained, precise, and she and the others would have to outthink them. Brute force wouldn't be enough. Natia, Jack called. Fall back towards the creek. That will draw them into the traps. Natia nodded, understanding the plan without question. Jack fired a warning shot to keep the operatives at bay and began to retreat toward the creek, carefully weaving through the trees. Natia followed Jack, darting from cover to cover, her eyes never leaving the masked figures. She heard the distant crack of Miguel's rifle from the back of the property, likely engaging the other 2 operatives Grizzly had spotted. And Grizzly's voice came over the radio again. You've got 2 circling the meadow, heading straight towards you, Jack. 2 more behind the house, aiming straight for Miguel. And I'm picking up movement behind you, Jack. Can't see it clearly enough yet, but I think you've got a couple more coming up from behind. Stay here, Jack instructed, his voice firm. Cover me. Without waiting for a response, he sprinted toward a stand of low-lying chokeberry bushes and began stripping off his clothes. In mere moments, Jack's form began to shift, his muscles rippling and bones contorting in that familiar but still unsettling way. His skin gave way to thick fur, and within minutes, a massive wolf was bounding towards Natia. Her breath caught in her throat as the enormous wolf locked eyes with her for just a second, before turning towards the enemy who was fast approaching. His fur bristled and his lips curled back into a snarl. He let out a growl. Natia couldn't help but feel a surge of confidence with him there. His presence was both a warning and a weapon. The two masked operatives emerged from the shadows, still unaware of what was waiting for them. Natia adjusted her aim, steadying her breath. "They're close," she whispered, knowing Jack could hear her clearly even in his current form. Suddenly, one of the men spotted Natia. He raised his gun, but before he could fire, Jack had lunged at him. In a blur of fur and fangs, he covered that distance in seconds, slamming into the man with a force that knocked him to the ground. The man's scream was cut short as Jack's jaws clamped down, brutal and efficient. At the same time, Natia fired at the second man, the shot ringing out across the clearing. The man dove for cover, returning fire as he went. She ducked down behind the log, the bullet splintering the wood above her head. "Jack," she shouted, hoping the wolf could finish the first attacker quickly and help with the second. She peeked out from her cover, readying herself for the next exchange of gunfire. Just then, the second attacker stood to get a better shot, but before he could pull the trigger, Jack had charged him from the side, teeth bared. The man stumbled back, trying to get a shot off, but it was too late. Jack hit him like a freight train. The sound of bones snapping echoed through the trees. The sudden quiet that followed was jarring. Natia stood, still gripping her gun tightly, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Jack looked at her for just a second, then turned and bounded off through the meadow towards Miguel and Igor. Shots rang out across the meadow in a back-and-forth volley of gunfire. It was impossible for Natia to tell who was shooting as the gunfire echoed from all directions. A bullet whizzed past her head, and she knew she needed to find better cover. She felt exposed, now that Jack was gone, and she wondered how many more men were out there. A radio earpiece was not working, and she had no way of knowing which way to run. She glanced at the stand of chokeberry bushes where Jack had left his clothes, and quickly darted from the log that she was hiding behind to the nearby bushes, rifling through Jack's clothes to find his radio. "Grizzly, this is Natia. I have Jack's radio. Can you tell me everyone's location?" Grizzly proceeded to fill her in on where Miguel and Igor were crouching down, swapping gunfire with two men dressed in black with masks. "Are there others?" she asked. "Two more as far as I can tell, and Jack is on them. They were out of camera range, but he had them running towards the river." "Can you see me?" she asked. "Affirmative," Grizzly replied. "You are clear, but stay where you are. If you try to make it to Miguel and Igor, you'll be seen. Just stay low and wait till I tell you it's safe to move. Julian's coming up behind the two men. Don't be surprised if you see another wolf out there." Natia sat back behind the bushes. She did hate to wait, but she knew it was the best thing to do for now. Minutes felt like hours as she waited behind the bushes, the forest suddenly unnervingly quiet. She wanted to stand up, to take a quick look around, but she had no idea how close the men were to her location, and she didn't want to risk being seen by them. Grizzly's voice came over the radio, just a whisper. "Natia, they've split up. One is coming straight towards you. Stay down." She heard a twig snap, closer than she expected. She held her gun ready to shoot should someone step into her line of sight. She could sense that someone was near. If she concentrated hard enough, she thought she could hear their breathing. Suddenly, a sharp cry pierced the air, followed by the unmistakable snap of a bear trap clamping shut. Natia's breath caught in her throat. The man had walked right into it. The shots stopped for the moment, replaced by the agonized groans of whoever was caught in that trap. "Grizzly," Natia whispered into the radio. "Can you see the trap?" There was static, and then Grizzly's rough voice came through. "We got him. Julian's coming up on the other one." Seconds later, a scream, followed by a gunshot. Grizzly's voice came back over the radio. "Julian just got the other guy. Ripped his head clean off. But he looks like he might have got himself shot. Get over there quick, Miguel." Miguel and Igor stood up from the stand of fallen aspen they'd been using for cover, and quickly ran across the meadow towards the trees, where the body of the Russian lay in a pool of his own blood. Julian was laying nearby, licking his wounded leg. Miguel rushed to his side and gently pulled the bloody hair away from the wound. Glancing up at Igor, he said, "It looks like it just grazed him. He's lucky. Could have blown his leg clear off." Julian let out a small cry of pain as Miguel felt around the wound, making sure the leg was still intact. It was then that Nadia came running up and threw her arms around Igor. "Is everyone okay here?" she asked. She glanced at the wolf with the bloody leg. "Is that Jack?" "No, it's Julian," Miguel replied. "Jack, he's not back yet. He chased the other two down to the river." "We need to go help him," Natia replied. "Jack killed the two that were on us, and there's another one over there caught in a bear trap." "We heard the cries, and we figured that's what had happened," Igor said. "Is he still alive?" "Yeah, but I didn't get close. He may still be armed," she replied. "Well, we need to get Julian to the house, and then we'll head to the river and try to find Jack," Miguel said. Julian cried out in pain as he tried to stand. Miguel took off his shirt and wrapped it around Julian's wounded leg, and the wolf limped on 3 legs back to the log house. Rosa was already waiting on the porch with bandages and a basin of warm water to wash the wounds. She'd seen the attack on the camera monitors. "I'll take it from here," she said. Miguel, Igor, and Natia darted up the trail that Jack had taken, chasing the other men towards the river. They were careful to avoid the bear and the wolf traps that had been strategically placed on the trail. Jack's paw prints were clearly visible in the soft dirt alongside the creek. They picked up boot prints from the 2 men running. "I wonder why we haven't heard any gunfire," Natia whispered to Miguel. They had stopped at a fork in the trail, and they were searching for boot or paw prints. Suddenly, out of nowhere, they were surrounded by the sound of children's laughter. As they turned and glanced around them, they saw the figures of children darting through the trees, laughing and chasing each other in their long white gowns. Natia froze. "Cover your ears if they start to scream," she whispered. The largest of the children stopped and motioned with his hand for the 3 of them to follow him. "I don't think this is a good idea," Igor said. "But what do we do? They're all around us," Natia replied. The strange boy motioned again, turned, and headed up the trail, looking back several times and making the same motion with his hand. The rest of the children began following their leader. They too motioned with hands to follow him. "I guess we follow for a bit anyways. They haven't caused us any harm yet, and they might be leading us to Jack," Miguel said as he turned and began walking up the trail. The forest was eerily still, and Natia noticed that the children made no sound as they walked through the forest. No sounds of twigs snapping or leaves rustling. The children were barefoot, and their feet seemed to barely touch the ground as they bounded up ahead of the 3 others, whose boots made crunching noises as they walked up the trail. Now, it wasn't very long before the trees began thinning. The sunlight was filtering through the trees, creating a dappled effect on the dirt trail. Bird songs filled the air as they stepped out of the trees into a large meadow of tall grass and boulders. "This looks familiar," Miguel muttered. "There's no cover. I think we should stay back here in the trees," Igor replied. Miguel nodded. "I agree. You two stay here. I'll cross over to the rocks over there." He pointed to the big group of rocks in the center of the large meadow. The same rocks he had found Natya and Igor laying on the previous morning. Miguel cautiously stepped into the clearing. The children were now halfway across the meadow, heading for the rocks. They turned once, in unison, and made the gesture to follow them once more, then disappeared around the boulders. Now Miguel walked forward, dodging rocks and holes and wishing he had the dogs with him. He wasn't sure why he felt so apprehensive. There didn't appear to be anyone else in the meadow or hiding in the trees, but he was fully exposed if someone did try to take a shot at him. Knowing there were at least 2 more Russian operatives out here in the forest made him uncomfortable. He knew he was an easy target. He glanced back and he saw Natya and Igor watching from behind a stand of willows and chokeberry bushes. The children were now nowhere in sight, and he was alone in the meadow, and it seemed to be taking a long time to make his way to the rocks. Time is different here, he thought, and distance. I should have reached the rocks by now. He looked back at Nadia and Igor and could tell that they were further away than the last time he'd looked. But when he turned back and faced the rocks, they seemed further away as well. He kept moving forward, watching the ground in front of his feet and convinced it was only a trick of the light. Some kind of optical illusion that was making the rocks appear to be moving away from him. The distance between himself and Natya and Igor had really grown. He thought about turning around and heading back towards them and foregoing the rocks, just to see if his vision cleared and his sense of distance went back to normal. But something compelled him to keep moving. A cold breeze swept through the meadow, rustling the tall grass and sending a shiver down his spine. The air carried a faint, familiar scent, damp earth mixed with something sweet and metallic. It was a little unsettling, yet oddly familiar, tugging at a memory he couldn't quite grasp. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Miguel reached the first of the large boulders. He pressed his back against it, grateful for something solid and real. He then peered cautiously around its edge, scanning the area for any sign of movement. He suddenly realized what that smell was that he had detected earlier. It was the smell of blood. Blood had dripped down the face of the rock, pooling in a puddle at his feet. A feeling of dread settled over Miguel as he crouched by the boulder. The thick scent of iron hung in the air, and he knew that whatever lay up on that flat altar stone would not be pleasant. Steeling himself, Miguel began climbing the boulders, looking ahead at the tall, flat rock where he had previously found Natya and Igor. The rock was slick with blood that had not yet fully dried. His heart was pounding in his chest, the urgency to uncover the source of the blood conflicting with the instincts to stay hidden. As he reached the top of the boulder and peered across to the flat-top rock in front of him, the scene unfolded like a nightmare. One of the Russian operatives lay sprawled across the rock, motionless. His mask had been torn off, revealing his face twisted in shock and pain. Claw marks crisscrossed his torso, deep and jagged, and the other man lay twisted and broken among the boulders. It appeared that he had tried to crawl from the larger altar stone and had fallen. Miguel's mind raced. This wasn't Jack's doing. Even in wolf form, he was controlled and precise, never leaving his victims in such a state. No, this was the work of something or someone else. His eyes scanned the surroundings desperately, sensing movement amidst the shadows. Now the strange children had vanished, but sitting atop another boulder several yards away was a massive, massive white wolf, its fur stained with blood. The wolf's eyes met Miguel's, unblinking, calculating. It wasn't Jack, nor any wolf he recognized. The wolf lifted its muzzle to the sky, letting out a deep, resonant howl that sent a chill through Miguel's bones. It echoed ominously across the meadow, a call and a warning in one. Miguel tightened his grip on his weapon. Then he heard footsteps coming toward him. He spun around to find Natya and Igor approaching cautiously. Miguel gestured for them to stop, signaling with his hand. "Stay back," Miguel yelled. "There's another wolf." The white wolf stood, its intense gaze never leaving Miguel. Then, without warning, it leaped off the boulder, disappearing seamlessly into the thick forest with a grace that belied its size. "Did it attack you? You were gone for so long, we decided to come find you," Igor asked, looking at the blood that had dripped down the boulder that Miguel was standing on. Miguel shook his head. "No, not me, but look," he replied as Natya and Igor climbed the rock up to where Miguel stood looking down at the blood-soaked bodies of the two Russians. There's no sign of Jack anywhere, and that was no ordinary wolf. "Well, what do we do now?" Natya asked. "Well, there's no sense moving these two. Let's head back to the house and check in with Grizzly," Miguel replied. Now, they left the meadow and headed back up the trail towards the big log house. Miguel caught himself glancing back at the meadow, feeling the weight of unseen eyes on their backs. The presence of the wolf left him with an unsettling feeling, a new player in the dangerous game unfolding around them. Once they reached the house, they found Jack waiting, human and unharmed. "What the hell happened?" Miguel asked as he stepped into the porch. Jack replied, "I chased two of them into the river. They kept separating. I ran after one and then the other. It was like herding a couple sheep. Anyway, they made it to the river and jumped in. Now, I didn't see them after that. The current took them downriver. I ran the river's edge for quite a distance and then back up in case they'd made it to shore, but I couldn't find them anywhere. I came back here to see if they'd circled back." "Well, we found them," Miguel sighed. "They're up on that rock, the same one I found these two on yesterday morning, and they've been torn to shreds. And Jack, there's a wolf there, a huge white wolf. Looks like you're not the only werewolf in these parts."
Thank you for listening to this week's episode, and I hope we'll see you all here next week for more of the Wolfman Chronicles. Have a great week, everyone.